human beings, PowerGamer here. I love leaves, though unfortunately I only have one at the moment. Luckily, there's this really cool trick I learned from Kirby Super Star where if you break it up into tiny little pieces, you can basically get 5 leaves in one. And the best part is, the guy at the store only charged me for the price of 2 leaves instead of 1. Sucker.
Kirby Super Star, when you run out of time and just throw everything you've got into one package. Okay, that's not really what happened, but this is one of the more unique Kirby games out there since it had a very different structure to the previous games, and it's something that the series never really tried again, kind of. Hell, I can't think of anything in any series that tried something like this, at least off the top of my head. Once again, it was developed by HAL Laboratory, and Masahiro Sakurai returned to the directing position. Apparently, he had 3 main things that he wanted to focus on for this game: cooperative gameplay, fighting game-style actions, and most importantly, a compilation-style format. And interestingly, the co-op was something that was requested by Shigeru Miyamoto, since he wanted to include simultaneous co-op in the Mario games, but he was unable to do that until New Super Mario Bros. Wii, which was over a decade after this game came out. The fighting game stuff was done by making enemies take more damage and expanding the copy abilities. And the compilation-style format was done because Sakurai believed the games at the time were getting too long and complicated, so he wanted to make something that was more digestible to people. Development lasted for about 3 years, which is much longer than a lot of other games at the time, and the main reason for that was because they wanted to incorporate some CG graphics similar to the ones used in Donkey Kong Country. And originally, there were plans to include a mode called Kagero Mansion, which was meant to resemble a horror game, but that ended up being scrapped. Though I wonder if that ended up being an influence on Luigi's Mansion becoming a thing. The game was released for the Super Famicom in Japan on March 21st, 1996, which was only a few months before the release of the N64, and it released on the SNES after the N64 launched in the rest of the world. North America got it on September 20th, 1996, and Europe got it on January 23rd, 1997. And interestingly, each region gave it a different name. In North America, it was called Kirby Super Star, but in Japan, it was called Kirby of the Stars Super Deluxe, and in Europe, it was called Kirby's Fun Pack. Regardless, the game sold over 1.4 million copies, so it did pretty well for the time, and reception was quite positive, with many people considering it one of the best Kirby games ever made, even today. And it would later get an enhanced remake for the DS called Kirby Super Star Ultra, released in 2008, which sold even better than the original, clocking in at almost 3 million copies, and had even stronger reception, which makes sense given how it was basically the same game as the original, but with more content added.
This is actually the first mainline Kirby game I ever played back on my SNES Classic Edition, though I never actually did everything, so it'll be interesting to see some of the stuff that I missed out on back then. Now, for the sake of consistency, I'll mostly be playing the original version, since that's the version included on the Dream Collection, but we'll talk about some of the new stuff that Ultra added as well. These are both some of the most popular Kirby games ever made, so let's see if that's warranted.
Remember how I said the game works differently from before and was meant to be a compilation of sorts? Well, if you take a look at the box, you'll see that it's actually 8 games in one, which is partially accurate. Each game works a bit differently from the other ones and has its own story to tell, so let's just start with what applies to all of them. Graphically speaking, this is one of the best looking games on the Super Nintendo. The sprite work is incredible and the colors are super vibrant, plus it thankfully doesn't run like a slideshow half the time like in Kirby's Adventure. And the soundtrack is great. A lot of it is reused from the previous games, but there's plenty of new stuff, and it being on the SNES makes it sound way better. In general, Kirby controls similarly to before. He has the dash by default this time as opposed to Dreamland 2, where it was locked to Rick, and the slide is back. For changes, you inflate yourself by hitting the jump button while in the air instead of pushing up, which I prefer since it's a bit snappier, and more importantly, you can hold the shoulder button to guard yourself. I love this, since it can reduce damage or just block it completely, which is extremely helpful, especially against bosses. You also have a proper health meter this time instead of just 6 hit points, which I vastly prefer. But even more helpful is that the copy abilities have gotten a huge upgrade. They do way more damage to bosses and mini-bosses, and you don't lose them if you take a hit. Instead, you have to take a decent amount of damage before you lose them, which I really appreciate since it makes things way less frustrating. Plus, the animal friends are gone, so we're back to the expanded copy roster of Adventure. But the biggest change is that the copy abilities now have multiple attacks tied to them depending on if you're jumping, dashing, or holding certain directions on the D-pad, kind of like a precursor to Smash Bros. In a way. In fact, some of the abilities from Adventure have been combined into one, like the 2 fire abilities, and all of them have gotten some nice buffs. But we've got some cool new abilities too, like Bomb, which lets you throw bombs, Fighter, which lets you quickly punch enemies, Suplex, which lets you grab, throw, and slam enemies around, Yo-Yo, which gives you a yo-yo that's way cooler than it sounds since it's fast and pretty strong, Ninja, which is way more disappointing than it should be since you can throw shurikens, which are weak, and do kick attacks, which almost always get me hurt, Wing, which lets you fly around faster and throw feathers, Jet, which lets you fly and dash with a rocket pack, Mirror, which is really cool since you can shoot little shards and duplicate yourself, Copy, which lets you scan an enemy to copy them, genuinely what is the point of this, Cook, which lets you cook enemies into food, Paint, which is another screen nuke that I genuinely found by complete accident, and Plasma, which lets you shoot plasma energy. Sounds cool, but you have to completely rotate the D-pad multiple times to charge it up, and this is extremely finicky. Even on the classic controller with the joystick, it's annoying. But we're not done yet, because you can also push the A button to create a helper based on the copy ability that you have. If you're alone, it's controlled by the computer, but this also allows for co-op, and some of them even offer extra tricks you can do. This is pretty helpful, since it can give you double the firepower and allow you to save a backup ability in case you lose the one you have, since pushing the A button again turns them back. Though the only way to change it is by finding one of these statues, which aren't in every mode, or by letting it die and then having it walk into another enemy so it'll steal those powers and regain health. Yeah, this is weirdly complicated and doesn't always work. You also share food with each other by spinning it into its mouth like a bird. That cannot be sanitary. And finally, we have the most important change to the copy abilities: hats! Now Kirby gets a new hat with each one, and it's absolutely adorable. I mean, this alone makes Superstar better than all of the previous games.
That's about everything in a general sense covered, so now let's get more into the different modes, or games, whatever you want to call them.
Up first, we have Spring Breeze, which is a trimmed-down remake of Kirby's Dream Land, but now with the copy abilities, which breaks the game as much as you'd expect. There's only 4 levels this time, and really it's more like 3. Green Greens is basically the same. You go right to Float Islands, which has no shooter section at the end. Bubbly Clouds is similar, and Mount DDD isn't a boss rush anymore, it's just the DDD fight. Speaking of which, the boss fights are all identical to how they were in Dreamland, but the copy abilities make them a total breeze. First you fight Wispy Woods, then Lolo and La 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 because no shooting, then Krakow, and finally King Dedede. Oh, now I get it. Overall, this mode is okay. It's extremely basic and takes less than 15 minutes to go through, but it's clearly the one you're supposed to start with, so it does the job. And it is neat getting to see what the original game would probably look like with copy abilities. Up next is Gourmet Race. Here you just have to beat King Dedede in 3 races while eating as much food as possible. Well, that caused me to gain or lose weight. Whoever has the most points at the end wins. It's extremely simple and over in like 5 minutes, so it's a distraction at most. After that is Dynablade, another traditional campaign where you have to stop a giant bird named Dynablade from stealing all of Dreamland's crops. Oh yeah, the previous modes have basically no plot. Spring Breeze, it's the same as Dreamland with Dedede stealing food, and Gourmet Race, it's just go. Anyways, this is a pretty straightforward mode where you have some standard levels, and the only interesting part is some mini-bosses you bump into in the overworld a la Mario 3. Plus this minigame where you shoot yourself out of a cannon to get bonuses after beating a stage. In the end, you have a fight against Dynablade. She flies around, grabs you, blows wind, and throws feathers. It's annoying if you're alone, but with an ally she goes down pretty quickly. After beating her, we discover she was just trying to feed her babies, so Kirby takes them to Wispy Woods to eat some apples, and then they all fly away.
Because crime is okay as long as you're a hardworking single parent.
Yeah, this mode is alright, but it doesn't do much to set itself apart from the rest of the game. Next is the Great Cave Offensive, which is one of the biggest parts of the game. You're placed in a giant cave with a bunch of branching paths and have to escape while fighting bosses and collecting as much treasure as possible. Now thankfully you don't have to collect all of the treasure to finish this, which is good because this place is absolutely enormous and there's no map feature, which is extremely stupid. So I just went through this to get over with as fast as possible, which mostly equates to running in a big circle. Yeah, I wasn't really a fan of this one, though I may be partially biased since it was responsible for giving us one of the worst stages in Smash. But you can ride in some minecarts, so that's kinda cute. There's 4 different bosses in this mode. Fatty Whale, which is a whale that rolls around and drops rocks on you. Computer Virus, where the game acts like a turn-based RPG and you have to kill 3 different monsters while dealing with their attacks. A slime, a puppet, and a witch. They mostly shoot stars, but the witch uses different spells. Then there's Camelio Arm, which is a chameleon that eats you, rolls around, and camouflages itself. And Wham Bam Rock, which is a disembodied face that slams its rock hands down on you. All of these fights are fairly easy if you have a good ability and make solid use of the guard button. This mode isn't bad, but it overstays its welcome pretty quickly. After clearing all 4 of those, we unlock another mode, but first I'm gonna look at the 2 sub-games since there's not much to say about these. They're just little bite-sized mini-games that are over pretty quickly. Samurai Kirby, as you push the button as soon as an icon appears to win a samurai duel, much like the Western mini-games in Adventure. And Megaton Punch, as you time button presses correctly to punch these bricks stronger than your opponent.
Jesus, Kirby packs a wallop!
Megaton Punch is amusing, but basically the same every time, and Samurai Kirby starts out alright, but eventually gets to a point where you have to push the button before the icon appears, which is luck-based. It took me over 10 minutes to clear it in beginner mode. Now we move on to Revenge of Meta Knight, which is another more traditional mode. Meta Knight has invaded Dreamland with his airship known as the Halberd, because he heard everyone was evading their taxes or something, and it's up to Kirby to stop them. This mode has you traverse the Halberd, as well as some areas on the ground, with each stage placing you under a time limit. Most of the boss fights represent different pieces of the ship's defense system, and as you go through, the Halberd takes damage. This is a pretty fun game, and honestly my favorite part is just seeing the banter that takes place between Meta Knight and his crew. Even Dynablade shows up to help you at one point. The boss fights are Wispy Woods again, which leads into a fight with 2 of it. The Twin Cannon, where you have to hit this cannon while avoiding cannonballs and the occasional laser or hand. Heavy Lobster, which is a robot that charges forward and sprays fire. And the Reactor, where you have to get these lasers to shoot into the center while dodging fire and this blast. So if you keep floating the whole time, it shouldn't be that hard. All of it finally culminates in a showdown with who else? Meta Knight. Much like in Kirby's Adventure, he provides you with a sword, but he has some new tricks this time, like a tornado spin. Once you beat him, you have to make a mad dash out of the ship before it explodes.
You know, I'd love to see how Meta Knight's insurance meeting went down. What do you mean failed conquest attempts aren't covered in my plan?
And now we reach our final mode, Milky Way Wishes. The sun and moon are fighting with each other for unknown reasons, so a little jester creature named Marks tells Kirby that he needs to find a giant clock named Nova who can grant wishes to stop them. This is by far the biggest mode in the game. It's only 7 levels, so it's still fairly short, but it has easily the most in-depth mechanics. Not only are most of the stages much longer than in the other modes, but you don't get copy abilities from enemies here. Instead, you find them lying around, and they become permanent additions to your arsenal. This is honestly a really cool idea, since being able able to switch abilities on the fly is fun, and it makes finding new ones that much more exciting. Honestly, I wouldn't mind seeing a full Kirby game use this type of thing, because it's really interesting. The 7 planets are all standard platforming themes: grass, water, sky, fire, rock, ship, and space. All of them end with a boss fight that's just a repeat from other modes, and you grabbing one of these stars. Except for the computer virus, which this time is the witch, then a knight that uses sword attacks, and a dragon that breathes fire and slashes. After collecting them all, Kirby summons Nova, but then Marx swoops in and wishes to control Planet Popstar, meaning all of this was his master plan. Nova grants him power, but Marx is about to learn the hard way why you don't mess with the pink puff. I mean, you saw what he did in Megaton Punch. We then have to go inside Nova, and the game becomes a full-blown shoot-'em-up. Just fly through the short section on the Warp Star while blasting enemies, and then fight the heart of Nova, which is just taking out all of these pillars and trying not to die. Not great, but not awful either. Now we can finally show Marx what for. He teleports, shoots these little things, shoots a bunch of arrows, drops seeds that grow into spiky plants, and even opens a freaking black hole. It is nuts, but also a pretty fun way to end things off. After killing him, Nova is destroyed, and Kirby decides to take a nap. This is easily the best mode of the game, both because it's the most expansive and because it has the most fun ideas. Honestly, I feel like this more than anything is held back by being part of the fun pack, because like I said, I would have loved to see a full Kirby game with this concept. But once you clear Milky Way wishes, we actually unlock one final game, the Arena. This places you in a gauntlet of every boss and mini-boss in the game, plus a joke section where you fight a single Waddle Dee, and that's hilarious. You're given access to every ability at the start, but you can grab a random new one in between each match if you want. You have 5 Maxim tomatoes you can use in between fights, but if you die, you have to start the whole thing all over again. Yet another example of Kirby having a precursor to Smash Bros, since this is a very similar vibe to All-Star mode. This is easily the most difficult part of the game, and it's also the most annoying since the slightest mistake can cost you the whole thing. And there's nothing worse than only having 1 or 2 boss fights left and then dying, meaning you have to do the entire thing over again, which happened to me more than once. I seriously spent over an hour and a half on this mode. It was a giant pain. Also, word of advice, make an ally of your preferred ability when you fight Meta Knight, since you have to use the sword. Personally, I used Bomb since it's both ranged and powerful, which makes it easy to avoid damage and not take too long to kill them. There's 19 bosses total, and while the order is random every time, the last one is always Marx. Once you beat it, you unlock a sound test. That's not worth it.
Well, that's everything in the original game, but now let's talk about Ultra.
Well, right off the bat, the production values have been upgraded. The sprite work is even better than the original version, and the animations are way more fluid. Plus, each mode has some FMV cutscenes, so that's fun. But for some reason, they swapped the controls of the original version, so Y is jump and B is attack, which kept screwing me up. We have 4 new main modes in this game, plus a few new sub-games. To get these out of the way, the sub-games are picking a card that's shown on the top screen, a Western target shooter, and eating things on a conveyor belt while tabbing bugs and bombs that cost you points. Clearly, these were just here to show off the touchscreen and provide some new multiplayer. But anyways, the new main modes start out with Revenge of the King, where King Dedede wants revenge on Kirby for beating him. This is basically a remastered version of Dreamland's extra mode, since much of the level design is similar and it's a lot harder than Spring Breeze. Plus, it even brings back the boss fight against Kalula. The final stage is an actual level this time, with banter between Dedede and Bandana Dee, which is a Waddle Dee with a bandana that makes him a higher rank. Much like Meta Knight and his soldiers, their banter is adorable. Almost makes me feel bad about killing him. For the Dedede fight, he gives you a hammer because he clearly took inspiration from an actually competent leader, and he has this mask, plus an upgraded hammer. His attacks are pretty similar, but now he's way faster and stronger. Plus, there's this electric cage around the arena, which hurts you if you go too high up. Nothing mind-blowing, but a decent way to add some more challenge, and it ends with you sending Dedede flying through the castle. The best new addition, though, is Meta Nightmare Ultra. Here you play as Meta Knight and run through an abridged version of all of the main modes from the original game, except for Gourmet Race. He's a bit frailer than Kirby and can only use his sword, but his sword attacks are way more versatile than Kirby's. He's much faster and significantly stronger. Plus, killing enemies fills up this meter, which lets you use 4 different special abilities. Night Call, where you summon a helper for assistance, Meta Speed, which makes you move faster for a short period of time, Heal, which fully restores your health, and Mach Tornado, which is a screen nuke. Meta Knight is absurdly strong, which makes running through all these stages a great time. This is another thing I would have loved to see a full game made out of. Most of the levels play out the same, although since there's no treasure or extra abilities, there isn't much of a point in exploring, so you're better off just running through as quickly as possible, but that's not a complaint. The biggest changes are that at the end of Stage 4, you just stop after destroying the reactor, because you can't fight yourself, and then after Stage 5, Meta Knight summons Nova and wishes to fight the strongest warrior in the galaxy. So Nova summons a warrior known as Galactonite, who was sealed away because he was deemed too powerful. He's basically a more difficult Meta Knight, but it still makes for a cool battle nonetheless. He's fast and strong, but thanks to Meta Knight's abilities and him providing you with meter fodder, you should be fine. Once he's destroyed, Meta Knight flies off, and that's about it. The final 2 modes are just different variations on the arena. Helper to Hero places you in control of a helper, which just means you're weaker and can't change abilities, and has to go through a smaller gauntlet of boss fights that aren't in a random order this time. It's easier than the normal one, but still really annoying if you die at the end. And the final mode is the True Arena, which is just a more difficult version with a new, harder Marks fight at the end. I'm good.
Game a really solid Kirby game, since it expands on what worked about the previous games while also adding plenty of great new features, though I will admit, the whole fun pack idea is kind of a double-edged sword, since on the one hand you get more variety, but on the other hand you don't get as much of something if you really find it fun, which can be a little disappointing to some people. You know, it's like buying one of those bundles of chips in a bunch of different flavors versus buying just one large bag. But even with those limitations, this is a great game and I definitely recommend playing it. While the original is more accessible, if you can get a copy of Ultra, definitely go with that, since it has more content, which is always a plus. I mean, I do have this one box fan, but I had to buy another one since it has new features, like these little things on the bottom.